Right. So here we are, David. Nice to be in person, recording a podcast together.
That's right.
So we're coming live and direct from beautiful New Orleans in Louisiana. It's been a really interesting couple of days, hasn't it?
It has been. It's been fun. With a lot of suppliers, a lot of clients, just been introducing ourselves, introducing you, having some great conversations.
Yeah, it's been really good. So in this episode, what I think would be really good to kind of wrap up the little mini series that we've been talking about. We've been talking about the program that you were running at Cox. So, $1.5 billion program that was like 95% services procurement. Amazing story. Great to kind of draw those anecdotes and experiences out of you. Really, really useful, hopefully, for people to listen to. And then we had a conversation talking about how you kind of, jump the fence, as it were, but shifted into that MSP advisory, service provider environment, which is really interesting to look at what you're looking to do with taking this offering to market at Pontoon, helping other customers, helping organizations with their services procurement, and taking all the lessons you've learned at Cox and really taking that into the reality with customers for Pontoon. So in this episode, what I really wanted to do was, firstly, we have to just talk about the last couple of days, particularly yesterday, the Talent Strategy Summit, which was a whole lot of fun, really interesting, with some great clients in there having conversations around services procurement with us and other Pontoon members, which was great. And also talk about a little bit about the kind of tech landscape and services procurement side, the kind of best fit avenue for MSPs, how to get that right combination of tech-enabled service that fits specifically for the particular client's, the particular client's needs. And then also looking at the real key stuff that you and the Pontoon team are looking to deliver. And to be fair, we're looking to deliver as a technology provider as well, around innovation and agility to really get this market moving. So I think there's loads of cool stuff for us to discuss. My first question to you is, with the TSS yesterday, how did you feel that discussion went? What was your did it meet with your expectations of what you expected it to be like?
It absolutely did. I mean, exceeded them. Just for the listeners, the Talent Strategy Summit is just a meeting of clients, potential clients, that's really facilitated by us. No intent for sell, just more for building relationships, sharing experiences. The focus right now is innovation and services procurement. So we picked clients that are farther along in the journey, and some that haven't even started or just beginning to start. And really just facilitating that conversation to share best practices, share experiences, what they've done in their industry, how they set up their procurement processes, what worked, what didn't.
Yeah, and I think the thing that strikes me about when these type of conversations happen is, as soon as you get the practitioners in the room, yourself being one of them, and people take a little bit of a while to kind of warm up to it. But once the conversation starts amongst the practitioners, it's just, you're off. And it's great because everybody's talking about what's happening within their programs. They're talking about the challenges within their businesses. You're able to talk about all of the amazing experiences you had at Cox and what you've done in your procurement journey as well. And it's just that kind of sharing of ideas, and that's how the market moves towards best practice. And because it was like a long form conversation, which is why I like doing this type of conversation, it just gives the chance to really get into the detail. The thing I find it quite frustrating a lot of the times, if you're at conferences and you have a round table and it's like 10, 15 minutes and then whoosh, turnaround.
Well, you can't get into any meat in those conferences, and you can't even talk about what you're actually there to talk about. By the time you pose a question, you've got one person that has an answer, and then you have the bell and it's gone, and everybody moves on to that next thing. So,
yeah, and I think just the general conversation, it was quite a high level of sophistication of like procurement practitioner chat, which is great to see, and it's really, it allows people to get into the detail of like what is actually making them tick on a day-to-day basis, talking about how it fits with finance, talking about how it fits with strategy, talking about the challenges. And also just people sharing ideas. How many people are in your team that does this? How do you approach that? And also I think just like the sharing of the problem statement is what I find really interesting, because people will go, that makes me feel better to know that you're in that situation as well. But it's you must see this all the time when you're talking to clients and prospects. There's generally there isn't a high level of maturity across the market when it comes to services procurement.
There's not, unfortunately, especially from a services standpoint of what we do with the clients, right? It's the contingent side is so saturated with MSPs, suppliers, the maturity is there, the technology is there that helps, give a level of delivery that the client needs. We don't have that yet on the services procurement side. We have the capabilities, but we don't have the actual clients or the prospective clients. The corporations haven't caught up to realizing what the need is. I believe we talked about a little bit in the last podcast where we were saying your typical procurement person doesn't see the full end-to-end life cycle.
Right.
So they don't understand the pain that finance feels, that your business stakeholder feels, that, having to do dispute resolution, manage the vendors, because everything post-signature goes back over the fence to the client or, to that engagement later, and they don't see it unless there's an escalation.
Yeah, and with people talking about how they're approaching from different angles, it's also seeing how they build trust and how the MSP world can build trust in services procurement, because it is a sideways move. And I know a lot of people say, oh, we're already doing X amount in services procurement, but a lot of the stuff is at a very low level of sophistication. It's kind of typically like worker tracking, that sort of resource-focused, basic administration approach to it, where there is anything in place. But I think seeing the conversation that was going on yesterday, with you kind of, facilitating that from a practitioner point of view, that's getting into much more of the meat of how procurement can add value to their buyers, their engagement managers, as you said, how they can bring value to the business and how they can also bring value into procurement. One of the comments yesterday was that, sometimes it can be a bit of a thankless task, but there's so much value that can be generated. When people are talking about the data and what they can do with the data, where they do capture it and where it isn't just thrown over to the other side and an SOW kind of scanned, signed PDF stuck in a document repository somewhere. There's a whole world you can do with it.
Well, and you become, the more mature, I feel like as a procurement organization, you become a better storyteller.
Right.
Because that's what you're doing, right? You're taking that data, you're telling a story with that data to your boundary partners, to your executives. You're building solutions versus just focusing on cost savings. Right? I mean, cost savings is great, but that's not what's going to get your business team to really move the needle and engage you and become more of a strategic partner and involve you up front so you can make those decisions on, what supplier should we use? What are we measuring the performance of that supplier? Making sure those outcomes and deliverables are tightly put together inside those statements, or should it even be in SOW?
Right.
Should it be going somewhere else? Are we looking at a 5 or 6 year time frame for building this? Well, why are we talking about an FTE? Or if it's 6 months, why aren't we talking about a staff aug resource?
Yeah, and so the kind of business case drivers, that was a really interesting part of the conversation, and the way that people are approaching the problem, I thought was also really interesting, which was where we kind of got into the discussion around, okay, all of these problems exist around services procurement, but which ones are most relevant to you? Which was where I'm going to bring in a prop for a second, where we brought in the extremely high-tech wheel of pain. So looking at all angles from rogue spend, misclassification, which is nicely upside down, scoping variations, leveraging AI, governance, performance, direct award versus competitive bidding, lack of visibility, no data for running category strategy, that sort of stuff. So I thought this was quite interesting, seeing where people were going with it. And the thing that I find that is a very useful device is something that certainly from a Zivio point of view, we found very, very useful in conversations, because you and I know that most organizations will have most of those problems, right? But when it comes to the individual organization, the ones that matter to them the most, I mean, even yesterday, there was quite a variation, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's performance management, misclassification, governance, they all very related, but different issues and focuses.
And I think that's what's nice about when I see you having a conversation with practitioners about this. It's not a sales conversation, effectively. It's a consultative conversation. And it's certainly what we try and do as well if we're talking to customers, because with services procurement, it's complex enough. It's not about You've got to get to the root of the matter for that particular organization. You've got to really understand it. And I've even seen situations where people will say, our services procurement is fine. And then if you actually take them through, well, how do you do this? Or how do you do that? And do you have any issues in any of these areas? People suddenly start going, oh, wait, that's a massive problem. But if you take it as just as if you try and approach it as just like, how's your services procurement? People can look at that as like, it's too big. They're in their mind, they're just like, oh, that's too big and complicated. But when you break it down into those specific areas, it really kind of plays into the reality of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and those pain points that are genuinely affecting them.
Well, and that's how I need to say, sell services procurement, right? You have to create a solution. You have to identify what their problem is, what their need is, and say, well, here, let's co-create your solution. Let's figure out what works best for you, whether it be technology, whether it be people, whether it be process, and help build that with them. And that's how you build the credibility, the trust, and that's really how you educate people.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into the conversation we're going to be coming on to about like technology within the service, because ultimately what you guys have got to do, what you've got to do as a practitioner and advisor, and what Pontoon have got to be able to do as an MSP is to find the most appropriate solution for a particular customer, which is, what's the best technology fit? What does that service need to look like? And it's, for you guys, you're just trying to say, we want to serve that customer as effectively as possible. But you need that information so you can kind of piece it all together.
Absolutely. I mean, we are agnostic to technology, so we want to come and figure out what the best solution for them is, right? To your point, what's the optimized solution? Do you need people on site? Everybody on site supporting your team, supporting your managers? What level of expertise do you need? Where are you in your journey? Do we need to leverage our offshore support model? Do we need to leverage an SPS like Civio? Do we need, or a traditional VMS, just based on the needs and the way they're already set up, servicing their staff augmentation? And there's so many factors that go into it. And it's not just procurement that you're solving that problem for.
Right.
And I think that's historically where a lot of companies have focused. It's like, well, procurement's the one buying the service, right? Because they're leading the RFP, or ultimately they're in charge of the statement of work. But the boundary partners, all of those stakeholders, all have a voice, right? And that's where you have to find out, all right, well, are we really solving for what legal needs as part of this? Are we really solving for corporate security, compliance, finance? Right? Finance is huge. And then ultimately, are you making the experience better for your end users? All right. I mean, every procurement person will tell you, if I'm there to service my stakeholder, right? We've got to make them happy, right? We've got, a lot of times that's why things don't get done as quickly or, as well as they should, because you're rushing to make sure you're meeting a timeline, you're fighting fires, you're making that end customer happy and getting them the signed agreement as quick as possible. So it's the same thing with how you're supporting them, right? Through your LSP and everything else. And that's why I said there's this gap, I feel like, with procurement teams. So when they sign that document and they send it back, they don't see all of those extra pieces beyond, right? It's not the full end-to-end life cycle. They're hopefully part of the upfront with the sourcing and the selection of supplier and negotiation. More often than not, they're just getting an already agreed upon SOW that came across from a supplier. So really you're only able to negotiate 5 to 10% off of that, because your budget's already been given to the stakeholder or to the supplier, so they know that they have already agreed. The stakeholders already agreed to that price with them. So you're really just checking compliance. You're checking, do we have the right legal language, indemnification, whatever it may be? Are the rates close to what we need them to be? Typically, yes, they are, because it's a preferred supplier or a supplier already in the network. And you're signing an agreement and sending it back. Your ability to impact is severely limited. So it's really becoming, part of that full end-to-end life cycle, and making sure that you're starting with your business stakeholder,
right,
but then coming back and ending with your business stakeholder, right? Because it goes, business stakeholder, us procurement teams, then you're talking about legal compliance, making sure those checks are taken care of before you sign it. Then you're going to finance, getting the approvals, getting it back to the end user, and then putting it in, hopefully, into some system to where you're actually managing the deliverables and outcomes, managing the performance of the supplier, and then able to take that data and use it for future decisions. That's where I feel we have a bigger gap is everybody anecdotally wants to use this supplier because they're on the network, but nobody has, what is the supplier's actual performance? Have we been happy with what they've done every single time? Is the product always met the need? The service that they created, is it always done what we want it to do? Or is it always 75% of the way there? Or change order management. We talked about this, the variations. You saw it on the wheel of pain there.
Yeah.
Right. At the TSS last night, one of the clients said, I have a massive number of change orders. So any negotiations you save on, let's say it's a $10 million agreement. Oh, great. I saved 25%. We got it down, to 7.5. But now I've got 4 change orders after the fact that wipe out that cost savings.
Yeah.
In fact, you're paying more because they didn't take the additional time with the stakeholder. And it's not necessarily the procurement's fault, right? It's often driven by the need of the business to really define that scope and those deliverables so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and these were really some of the key points that were coming out of that conversation yesterday. And certainly that end user part of it that you just mentioned, you really described that kind of life cycle very nicely there. But that is really important to people. And this concept of people going to the business and saying, how can I help you? Procurement going to the business to say, what can I do for you? How can I make your life easier? As a technology provider, as a specialist in services procurement, we've learned our lesson over the years that we've been doing this, that like you say, it's not necessarily just serving procurement. It's like there's definitely that kind of a little bit of approach of like, no one cares enough about that. The business doesn't care enough about that. It's a tough world if you're a procurement practitioner. You just, you've got to crack on with it, sometimes with limited resources, often with quite lean teams. But where these programs can be put in place, it elevates the role of procurement by giving them more data and allowing them to help the business more effectively. So I always take the approach of, we always kind of preach this easier, faster, safer for people in the organization who need to buy services to do so and to also get value with it. And that really came across yesterday with these discussions with the clients and practitioners, which I just think is super valuable because that's the information for people like you and I providing services in this area. That's what we need to hear and understand and reinforce, but also for them talking to each other. It just sort of clarifies things for people, doesn't it? Otherwise it can feel like super complex or that everyone's so different, but when you bring it back to it, most people have got the same similar problems.
They do, and it's just a different pathway to that same problem, right? Or you look at it differently, right? We talked about the classification. Well, honestly, performance management really ties into a lot of that classification. If your suppliers are taking advantage of what you're doing or how you set up that supplier on an SOW, you talk about these large managed services SOWs, they're really time and material. It's really staff augmentation hidden inside that SOW because there's no outcome. Well, you're just managing people, you're managing a butt in a seat. You've got one of your own team members or your business stakeholder is managing that person on the work that they're doing. So it becomes, a problem that it just keeps feeding itself, right? And it keeps growing and keeps exacerbating.
One of the things I want to come on to is the supplier angle, because I think that's a really interesting part of it. And there's some interesting parts came out in that conversation yesterday and also in the Pontoon Supplier Summit. Some of those conversations with suppliers I thought was really, really interesting. But just before we get onto that, so with your background as a practitioner, what are the types of conversations you want to have with customers in the sense of, obviously that conversation, that kind of round table set up yesterday, perfect. It allows you to talk about your experience, just draw the information out of other people and get people talking, that sort of thing. But when it comes to organizations out there that are struggling, we've known each other for a little while now. I know you're absolutely not the sort of person who your approach isn't to just like, hey, let's dive in there and sell this to people. You very much seem like you just want to understand what's going on.
You have to understand what their problem is first, what their pain point is, or you take the consultative approach. You talk about the wheel of pain. That's an easy way to get somebody talking. Really, here's some things that we see that are common in the industry. Do any of these apply to you? Start there, right? And then that really can really give you a place to start to say, all right, well, it's misclassification. Well, is it an intake issue? Is it, is it a structure issue for your statements of work? You can really expand into really what are the actual problems, what are causing the problems. And that's when we start building that solution of like, okay, well, I think I have something that would really solve that for you, that could help you, like if we talked about Pathfinder for intake.
Yeah.
Right? Or if you need, we're not able to bid anything. We don't have the capability. We don't have the resources. Well, we've got Zivio that's got an awesome, post-intake. Let's say it comes in through Pathfinder, comes into Zivio. We can automatically do 3 bids and a buy. It's got automated project scope creation. So it really is that consultative approach and listening.
Yeah, and so for people that may not have come across it before, Pathfinder is your in-house triage tool, isn't it?
It is.
And I know it's got quite a complete scope in terms of it can do some pretty cool stuff, but ultimately it's helping people just decide where to put the work, how to execute the work, and the considerations around, regulatory side of things for where that needs to go.
Well, regulatory, but it also incorporates their company policies. How do you define labor? Is it 1099, IC? Is it professional services? Yeah. So it takes all those factors into play for the recommendation that it then gives you.
So going back to the supplier angle, there was some really interesting conversation at the Talent Strategy Summit around supply chain, around the conversations that procurement practitioners want to have with their supply chain, around the benefits for their supply chain of these programs being organized, and also within the conversations yesterday at the Pontoon Supplier Summit. Lots of things came up around, the need for visibility, the need for structure, the fact that, suppliers want to do a good job, and there's a big range of what the supply chain can offer. It's not just the kind of usual suspects, the big, very well-known consulting firms.
Well, and you're seeing that, right? You're seeing your big consulting firms start moving into your traditional staff augmentation roles, right? They're starting to offer services where they're giving you hourly employees billed at that staff augmentation rate. And on the flip side, you see your traditional staffing firms moving into more of that consultative role of, fulfilling statements of work. So it was a big pain point for a lot of them where they talk about, the MSP is a blocker for them historically, or not even historically, it's currently a blocker to them. More often than not, that's based on company policy, right? So like I gave the example for when I was at Cots, you're either in the staffing lane or you're inside the service procurement. You don't play in both. The theory there is you want to maintain vendor neutrality. You want to be able to give all of your staffing firms the same level, competitive play field, which they wouldn't have if they were in both fields, right? Because just by the nature of the work with services procurement, you're working closely with the manager. You're defining scope. You're defining outcomes. So you're learning significantly more about the actual needs of them from just a service standpoint, than also potentially from some of the staffing. And I think operating models are changing, right? Technology is helping enable us. I think that we're also able, as MSP, to manage that better and manage those expectations. One of the young ladies said, in order to do work doing services procurement, she had to create another company so that they would have 2 different entities. I mean, still the same ownership, right? But 2 entities, one doing the staffing side and one doing the services procurement. And to me, that seems like it's so, there's a much easier problem or solution to that than forcing a supplier to go through that entire process, especially when you clearly want them to do the work, right? You wouldn't even be giving them this option. So I think that's where the MSP needs to become more creative and become more of an enabler versus a blocker.
And I guess it's also where the more that MSPs can bring the services side of it into their offering under their remit and do that effectively, they can remove those blocks to a certain extent with their processes. And obviously, it's not just the suppliers that are also staffing suppliers; it's all of the suppliers. And I think this idea of the issue around visibility would apply across pretty much anybody in the supply chain, including big consulting firms who might be working with a particular part of the business, doing an incredible job, And, even if it's competition within those big consulting firms, if a particular organization is doing a great job for their end customer, other people within that end customer need to know about it. That's where you get into the performance tracking. That's where you get into the kind of sentiment analysis around, not only did they hit their milestones, did they stay within costs, did they avoid having loads of changes and scope creep, but also did they do a good job? Did the stakeholder feedback and say that they were delivering value for money?
Well, and that's a hard thing, right? Because stakeholder feedback, it's hard to get.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be candid. It is difficult. And honestly, I feel like that's another place the MSP can help, right? I mean, not necessarily just to chase a stakeholder, but to help provide feedback. Because often they're talking to those managers already. The manager's like, oh yeah, they did a good job. Well, they could put in that information for them, saying, all right, I'm going to give them 4 out of 5 stars. Or making it a simpler process. You see some of these feedback questions, the automated surveys that come afterwards, and they want you to write a book, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you've got to make it quick, you got to make it easy, because it's all about time with managers and ease. And if they don't have that, they're gonna ignore it completely. And I'm not saying it's going to solve the problem, because it's I don't know, it's always been an issue, right? And it probably always will. But if you could bump it from a 20% response rate to a 50% response rate, that's more data you have that really can drive better decisioning in the future.
So on that data angle, that kind of brings us on to the technology element of the services procurement space. And I'd just be interested to kind of get your view on the landscape, in the sense that you've got triage platforms, you've then got vendor management system platforms, so kind of more traditional like contingent workforce type platforms that have services procurement or SOW capabilities. Then you've got dedicated services procurement systems like Zivio and others coming into that market as it's kind of growing. You've got autonomous sourcing platforms. Then you've got your kind of source to pay, procure to pay type platforms. There are options, right? But it can seem like a bit of a confusing landscape. In your head, how does that kind of landscape break down?
So it's you break it down by need for the client, right? I mean, it really is understanding their solution and understanding their problem. Right? You talk about your traditional, Coupas, Oremos, really great at goods.
Yeah,
really great. But when you start looking at services, okay, I can get a PO, but it says service.
It's like someone said yesterday, it was like you end up with this one-line PO.
And you don't know anything about the service. You don't know what it is. You don't know, you know what you paid for it, but you don't know performance. You don't know what the actual service provider was. You don't know how many people were brought on to do it. So beyond just the lack of visibility, you also have a compliance issue,
Right.
Right, as well. So I view it as really kind of, like I said, understanding what their problem is, but it's ever changing, right? And the change is coming even faster now. Like you said, the autonomous sourcing platforms, GSPSs, traditional VMSs, they all have their place.
Yep.
And it's all trying to find what is the best solution for that client. A lot of your clients already have, or a lot of our clients already have a VMS in place. So is it easier for them to have the same VMS if they wanted to roll out services procurement? Because a lot of single source of truth, it's a real benefit. Others are more willing to try something. They want something that's more AI enabled, more full end-to-end life cycle, where they can do the bid management, RFX management, and then the performance management as well. Or they just want a front end for like the autonomous sourcing platforms. They just want a front end for the bid piece. And they don't want anything else beyond that. They want it just to spit out into their traditional EMS or into their traditional ERP that they have, going straight into Oracle or somewhere else. So it's really trying to understand what they're trying to solve for and then helping them do it, right?
Yeah, and I think the way you laid that out is really interesting. It ties in with some of the conversation yesterday where people were talking about like needing agility, needing options. And that, I think that's what's exciting about the services procurement space at the moment, because I feel like now there are options. Previously, there weren't really options for people. They're either stuck in their kind of just their source to pay environment, which is, as you say, it's generally just going to be too top level. It's not going to get to the granularity of statements of work and the requirements and the downstream delivery. That's where you end up with this SOW in a file repository, and it's just a one-liner PO. And when it goes into execution, is it captured anywhere? No. And it's like, are the milestones in the SOW? Maybe, but maybe they've changed and they're not digitally captured. So that presents these problems for procurement where they just don't have any granular data. And I mean, again, volume came up yesterday where people were saying that you've got this particular procurement stakeholder that they're trying to deal with like 500 SOWs going through per year or whatever it was. And it's just like impossible to stay on top of that volume. Wow. Or alternatively, previously, the only route was maybe one or two of the VMSs that had introduced kind of like resource tracking, worker tracking, SOW type functionality to prove milestones and do all that sort of good stuff. But now the market is broadening out. And as I've said to you many times, it's not a zero-sum game. People are going to need to do things differently. But the most important thing for me as a kind of like evangelizing in this market is it's better to capture it digitally in some sort of system and get a proper process in place. The benefits to the organization are so huge that how each organization needs to do it might be slightly different. But the benefits are there. And that's the thing that having these discussions, it's like kind of pretty clear that the benefits are there and people are realizing that.
They are, right? And I think we touched on this in one of the other podcasts. I mean, you're seeing a lot of focus now on services procurement, especially now in the age of, AI replacing a lot of people being laid off. They're switching that work being done from internal FTEs to your services procurement. And they're realizing, why did my cost go up 4 times? Well, you don't have an internal resource doing that now. Now you're paying somebody else. And that cost typically is going to be more expensive. Your FTE, that work is now being shifted somewhere else. And they don't know who's doing it. They don't know what service it's doing. I mean, they know who, but they know how much they're paying, but they don't know what is the outcome that they're trying to achieve inside of cyber defense services that try to engage with something.
Yeah, and it's also this shift more towards like outputs and output-based mentality. Yep. So, as I was said in the conversation yesterday, some interesting conversations I've had recently around AI and pushing things more to an output mentality, because if it takes me 5 days to do something as an employee or as a contractor or whatever, and then how long does it take you with AI? Or maybe it only takes me 3 days. Then is the best thing to measure my performance? Is it how many days did Johnny work? Or is it like, what did I achieve? Is it outputs? And it's definitely moving more that way. So I think, this kind of mentality around the value of it, even just using the phrase services procurement, over the last couple of years, it's really like crystallized the conversation. It's made it kind of from this, the fog has coalesced into something that's really clear. And that's why I think it's so great when you're able to talk to people about, for example, your experiences at Cox, where it's interesting for me when I see you talking to somebody about it and you sort of say, it's like a $1.5 billion program or wherever it was. And when they say what percentage of that was service procurement and you say 90 to 95%, people look shocked and they're like, okay, wow, that's pretty amazing. And also you can see their mindset shift to say, okay, well, people are out there and they're managing big programs with a really good level of sophistication around services procurement. Maybe we can do that too.
It is, right? And we talk about this, it's the education piece. It really is. It's really saying, it is being done. It's being done well. Now, how can we do it for you, right? And then you get into that solution. You figure out what their problems are. Honestly, it's also a mindset shift for a lot of your traditional procurement folks. I go back to the example earlier. It's not my problem anymore. Once it's gone, once that SOW is signed and back to the business. But there's so much more inside that organization that's happening with that SOW on the downstream of that post-signature that I would argue that the bulk of the work isn't the negotiation up front and getting it signed and the signature. It's all of the management beyond, management of the deliverables, management of the people, management of the suppliers, ensuring that everything's being formed and done in the way it's supposed to be done.
Well, it was interesting hearing some of the stakeholders at the TSS yesterday. one company representative in particular was talking about having a dedicated team that was kind of like following that life cycle, was taking on that downstream responsibility. And I completely agree with you. And it's sort of, it ties into procurement having more responsibility and more focus on what the business outcomes.
Well, in that example, they're talking about direct spec.
Yeah.
Right? So you're talking more about your goods. It's not, that's part of the problem. Is like, if you look at the goods side, the tracking, the management, it's so much more mature. And rightfully so in some cases, right? If you think about the goods, if I don't get these 20 widgets on time, made the way they can, it's more revenue impacting than your services side. The services side, they didn't get me exactly what I need. I can go back, tweak it, and make it work, right? You can't do that with goods.
Right.
That's a good point of things. So there's a lot more involved, because he said, they had 350 people.
Something like that, yeah.
A large amount, right? And then just for your services procurement, the indirect, 30, right? And you're managing more spend with the same.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of that mindset there as well. It's like realizing that your services, you can't be treated the same as goods, right? They need to be tracked separately, tracked differently. I mean, honestly, if you want to equate it as a goods, you've got to track the quality of the product. You've got to track the performance of the suppliers that deliver on time. So, I mean, you could argue that they're very similar in that regard, but it's not being done on the services side.
And also, you've got to cope with just the fundamental nature of services, that intangible. They're hard to define. They're not, it's always a red widget using descriptions, but if you're buying 50 red widgets, what size they are, how much they weigh, what they cost per unit, it's easy to compare them. Services are so nuanced, pretty much every project could be different, even within the same organization. And so just understanding that complexity and understanding the nature of the fact that they will change, the subject and change as well, that's where the upfront process of like scoping, and that was one of the things that came out on the wheel of pain for a few people, actually
defining it. Well, making that scope as crystal clear as possible. Because at the end of the day, even when that service is finalized, it's still that business leaders, their sign off, their approval. They're saying, yes, that's the product. It's their opinion, right? It's really them saying, yeah, I think that they did what I asked them to do.
And it was interesting yesterday. I know obviously some of the stakeholders that were in the meeting, in the discussion, are already Pontoon customers. But the idea or the mindset around outsourcing this to an MSP and bringing an MSP to assist with it. I mean, all of the teams are lean. Let's face it, all of the procurement teams, all of the people, the representatives there, their teams are, pretty much pushed to the limit. So it was interesting looking at the mindset around, well, look, we want to bring in help. We don't want to try and do this all ourselves. The MSP can bring in the process. They can bring in extra bandwidth. And they bring in, a tech-enabled solution, whatever that kind of solution might look like for that particular organization. Obviously, having someone like yourself within the MSP steering it from a practitioner point of view and very much building the strategy on that service and being able to consult with the client on the more nuanced, practical and technical parts of the procurement process, that's something that I think the trust is really building in that sort of service. It certainly seemed like that in the conversation yesterday.
It did, right? And we had, like we said, we had a good mix. We had a few that we've had clients for 20 plus years, right? And a few that are newer clients, brand new clients, actually. And we're rolling out services procurement for them. In some cases, others, it's just your traditional staffing that we're doing for them right now. But it's the support. It's the support needed, the expertise, the extra hands. I mean, you talk about resourcing. It's I hate to call it a zero-sum game in procurement, but you're never going to have the amount of people you need to manage on the services procurement side to manage the entire spend.
Especially if you're doing it manually.
Especially if you're doing it manually. And then on top of that, because the expectation is you're not just doing the sourcing and the contracting. Often your business says, well, you should be doing the vendor management too. You should be doing the escalation management. You should be doing all of the things that people bring our MSP in to do. But procurement doesn't have bandwidth to do that. They don't have, a lot of time, the capability. It's a different skill set to do escalation management, to do, working with finance and everybody else on the downstream activities.
Okay, so we talked about the aim of understanding the problem and creating the right tailored solution for a particular organization. One other thing that I thought would be interesting to discuss is, why you guys are partnering with us and what we're kind of doing around that. And I think it ties into, firstly, achieving best fit in the sense that you guys need options, right? You need options for your customers. And that's what you guys seem to work pretty hard and have a strong strategy driven by, coming right from the top, driven by Sam Smith, to say we need the options to serve our clients and deliver the right things for them. That's expanded what you guys can take to market and how quickly you can do it, really.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's about more options, right? And we've got to be able to stay current as a provider as well. And if we don't have those options, our competitors will. So partnering with you via MSBS is a logical next step in my mind, right? Because with Zivio, I mean, honestly, I can do it's on the sourcing piece with Zivio. You can do the full end-to-end lifecycle management. You can do your AI generated scope creation, the supplier performance management. It's already native within the system. So from an end-to-end software, Zivio is a logical next step, right? And it's something that we can lead with clients, especially in our mid-market space, or even in our large enterprise space where clients are utilizing a VMS.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we work alongside VMSs a lot of the time, where there is the right scenario. It's like, well, okay, the contingent is going to be captured within a VMS, and either the VMS doesn't have the sufficient capabilities for services procurement, or isn't, for whatever reason, the organization don't want to use it for services procurement, or maybe they want to make sure they're using those kind of upfront AI, the kind of pre-contract stuff, as well as the post-contract downstream stuff, and they want an end-to-end solution. Then we just simply run alongside the VMS, and it doesn't have to be complex. And when you've got a nice intake process using something like Pathfinder or a triage tool to bring it in and then put it down the right path, it's just about nice user experience.
Absolutely. The user experience is, we are there to enable, but a user could come in fresh, never had seen the system, and could walk through and on Zivio. That's not as easily done on your traditional VMSs. Another thing that I love about Zivio is multi-client instance that we've set up with you guys. So that's a live instance that we curate, that we can set a client up in 30 minutes, an hour, onboard some suppliers. We could do scopes of work. We could do smaller scopes. You can't do that with a traditional VMS. You can't come in and say, hey, let's do a pilot. Let's test it. Let's run one SOW through. Let's pick a $500,000 SOW, something, wherever you're having a problem. See if this helps, and run it through simply for a procurement team. And you can do it quickly. You're not talking about a 19-week implementation time frame. You're talking about setting somebody up within a week or two and getting them into that instance and running them through.
Yeah, and do you know what? I feel I love the fact that you guys are taking that approach, because it brings that kind of innovation into it. It brings agility into it. The fact that you guys genuinely can move seriously quickly and just put these POCs through, run pilots for people, break things down into manageable chunks. I feel like that kind of approach is a game changer. I've seen it be extremely successful in kind of like public sector environments as well, where you have frameworks where that type of operation takes place. As we were discussing yesterday at Cox, you were proving the case in one part of the business, taking it to the next part of the business, maybe making some tweaks. I had a great podcast recently with one of our clients, a lady called Nick Everett from Talent Technology Services. Exactly the same approach. Prove it in a particular area, take it to the next area, build it, build the trust, get the stakeholders on board. And it's just, when you look at this kind of big, complex services procurement problem, breaking it down and being able to move quickly, that's where a lot of people seem to be getting success.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, you're seeing a lot of, especially in the UK and EMEA, you're seeing a lot of firms start wanting to use services procurement, whether it be a VMS or something else, because of compliance. Compliance is driving it, right? I mean, you talk about, the rules are much more strict, and you need that capability to report on, manage, classify correctly, because it's a hefty burden if you don't. And so it becomes a use case for where did we have a miss, right? So that's where you start. And then you build that solution. You're not wrong. It is going from business to business, understanding the nuances of their business and how it fits into the system, how the system can enable them to be faster, smarter, and more innovative.
Yeah, and do you know what? For a while, I've felt like when you go to the conferences and the services procurement discussions come around, now they're suddenly all accelerating. But for the past 5 years plus, maybe even 10 years, it seems to be like the same things are rolled out year after year. And like, when is this going to move forward? And I felt like when it comes to services procurement, it wasn't clearly enough defined. There weren't enough kind of like case studies coming out there, like people like yourself coming out and talking about what you've done at Cox and coming into the MSP world and bringing in that expertise. But I felt like the industry was like blocked up, stuck. It's too big to move. People in their heads are thinking, if there aren't enough options around the MSP service, the expertise they can provide and what their service actually looks like, and the technology piece, if there aren't enough options, then people just go, it's going to have to be really big, it's going to be really expensive, it's going to take ages, I'm going to need every stakeholder in the company to agree on it, we're going to have to eat the whole elephant at once. And surprise, surprise, people don't do anything.
That's the biggest issue, is your traditional implementations for a services procurement software, or not software, but the VMSs, take so long. And there are so many stakeholders involved. And what we're doing with that multi-client instance, we can bring in one finance person, just integrate into their, generate a PO back. We can bring in that SOW. Honestly, we don't even have to do payment of the SOW. We can say, look, we're just going to bring it in, show you how you can track it. The supplier can be onboarded, they can invoice against it, then we'll send you can approve that invoice and send it over to your AP team, and then they can do the traditional payment versus going through the system. I mean, there's so many different ways you could do the proof of concept, but it's really just trying to enable that client, that end user, to experience it and see it. And that's been one of the biggest blockers, I feel like. It's one thing to have a demo to see, oh, here's the capability, but how's it really going to impact something I'm working on?
Yeah, 100%. And when people actually see real results, I mean, it's like, as you said earlier, it's not one size fits all. It's horses for courses. And there were people in the room yesterday talking about what they're doing with their VMS that they use for contingent and services procurement, and giving great feedback on how they've made great strides in it. And so I think that the fact, obviously, as you say, you guys, you're tech agnostic, and as a tech provider, we work with various MSPs and different types of partners and stuff like that. But what I've been really grateful for with the partnership with you guys is the close level of collaboration. Like, we've really been getting our heads together on it and trying to solve these problems for customers and getting the customers in the room and having the conversations. And I just think that, it's the industry, there's opportunities for everybody. There's so much scope in services procurement. It's such a big problem. It's so large within so many organizations. I feel like it just needs to, or it's getting to the point where it's kind of like, it's going over the tipping point now. And getting these sort of conversations out there, getting people to understand the art of the possible, and doing things like the disruptive approach you guys have taken of saying, well, hey, you know what? We are going to turn things around quickly. We are going to run proof of concepts. We can be agile. That is, in my opinion, really going to disrupt the market in a very, very positive way, because it's just going to open it up for everybody. But also it's the commitment that Sam and Pontoon have made to bring in your expertise as well. Because that was something that I think where, previously maybe some of the trust has been lacking. Like, oh, you're a staffing company, or you're an MSP, why would I let you loose with my procurement information? Whereas when people can get into a conversation with an SME like yourself, and I know this is something that's happening more in the MSP market, people bringing in service procurement expertise, and there are people out there who've been doing it for a while, that's where the conversation can really flow to that next level.
Well, it becomes really understanding and telling that story, right? And understanding the actual pain that they've been through. What are they living through, right? And it really relating at that level is what it becomes to. Yeah, and to your point, it builds that trust. It says, all right, you've done this, you've seen this issue. I think we can actually build something together to actually fix the issue that I have.
So basically, the services procurement is becoming much more of a tangible thing. for organizations to think about. It's becoming much more of a topic of real conversation, which is fantastic to see. There are more options available to organizations in terms of how they do it, and there are more options available to you guys as an MSP as to how you execute it for a specific customer. So everything's really moving in the right direction, isn't it?
Absolutely, right? And now it's just continuing that conversation. I mean, we've talked about it. It's education, education, education. I mean, it really is really like enlightening people beyond the, oh, well, an MSP can handle transactions. Well, no, it's more than that. We can handle customers. We can handle suppliers. We can help enable your business. So, and like I said, it's been clearly matured in the staffing side, and that's been understood there. And now it's starting, to your point, it's starting to happen on the service procurement side, and it's moving faster. Like, I think we talked a little bit yesterday. I mean, almost every RFP that I've seen since I've come here in the last 6 months has had a component of services procurement in it. If it wasn't something that was a focus now, it was something they wanted to make sure that we can provide them in the future if they decided to go down that path.
Yeah, it's very noticeable, and it's a real thing. And getting people together, like yesterday, you know, again, hats off to you guys and Sam and yourself for making that happen with those customers and getting that conversation to take place in a kind of long-form environment. That's what's really going to move things forward, opening it up.
Well, and it's fun, right? Yeah. It was so fun just being able to get them in the room. Like, I mean, for my part, I had, my part where I was just leading the discussion. I think I probably did maybe 10% of the time, which is the point, right? Because we're trying to bring peer groups together so they can talk about what they're doing within their company, the pain they're experiencing, how they're solving problems, or how they could possibly solve a problem over here with with one of the other companies. And it was fun to see. It was fun to see the excitement, right, and the engagement. So,
yeah, and as we both kind of alluded to, it's not a zero-sum game in any way. It's just a big opportunity. So that's why it's great to try and get this type of conversation out there. I would encourage anybody who's kind of worried about services procurement, wondering what's the art of the possible, get involved in peer-to-peer discussion. Come and talk to somebody like yourself who's been there and done it.
Well, I mean, you talked, like yesterday, we had Beeline, Fieldglass, Simplify. I think all your VMSs are represented. We've got people on. We had a good conversation about AI. They're on Azure, Copilot, Microsoft, Google. So it's not, to your point, it's not a zero-sum game. We're not trying to sell something specifically. It's really just, especially when you talk about experiences, and services procurement, it's not necessarily what technology are you using. It's how are you using the service that we provide, or what are you doing from a process perspective? Is it a top-down? How did you convince your executives to do, to go, give you approval to do this? Or how are you influencing your business stakeholders? Are you doing it through engaging your compliance teams, your finance teams, your corporate security teams? It's just fun to have that conversation and see how different procurement teams have matured and where they have a lot of room for improvement, and then helping them connect and say, yeah, well, we did this, and this is what really works for us.
Yeah, I love it. It's really not that long ago that being at some of the kind of like workforce conferences, and people were just like talking about statement of work, and and now this conversation has matured so much. Remember, I did roundtable at one of the workforce conferences 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago, and I was literally the only person with a service and procurement or statement of work-based topic at that point. And then, fast forward it now that it's blossoming out, and the conversations are springing up, and the practitioner conversations are springing up, which is what's great. And for people that are interested in it, they can suddenly come in, and there's just much more like information available there.
Well, and to your point, especially in the MSP world, it's always been a statement of work focus. Right, if you talk about the different industry conferences, it was as the SOW play services procurement so much beyond the SOW. Right, it's that full end-to-end lifecycle like we talked about. It's the intake, it's the sourcing, it's the supplier management, the performance management, the deliverable management, making sure they're adequately, to get to the SOW part, making sure they're adequately scoped. Is it the right vehicle, or is it a T&M? Is it fixed fee? or should it be staff aug, or should it be somewhere else? So it starts even moving into that broader total talent conversation as well, right? So it's like it's you're getting more people coming to the table with an interest because they're realizing they are part of that process, right? I mean, total talent, I feel like total talent failed for so many years because you didn't have HR talking to procurement and talking to the business, right? So it's a three-legged stool, and if any one of those is missing, it's going to fail every time. And you need all three of those to really say, all right, where are we putting this work? Is it FTE? Is it care? Being a part of that upfront process with your business, because they're ultimately driving those decisions. They're saying, this is the work I need. This is how I'm defining it. All right, it's a 5-year time frame. All right, let's say it's an FTE. Let's talk to HR, make sure we're talking about it. Or SOW, same thing. We think it's going to be a 3-year time frame. Well, but is it a skill that we think that would persist in the business that we need beyond? You need somebody challenging back, saying, doesn't necessarily should it be an SOW? No, we might actually need an FTE for this to do the work, because even though it might be a 2 to 3 year project, that skill set's still going to be needed for more projects that you have afterwards.
So we've got more clarity, more people realizing this is possible, more options in the market from a technology perspective, from a service offering perspective, more flexibility, the desire to really go out and make this happen. It's exciting times, isn't it? It feels like a let's go moment. And certainly the last couple of days here in New Orleans has been fantastic for that, and a really great coming together of people talking about these subjects. So I think it's super encouraging, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation and have the previous conversations we've had to get your view and your input out there. Let's bring on more discussion and more activity and opportunity within the market, because this is going to change the game for companies. It's a big opportunity for MSPs to add huge amounts of value. The world's, heavily weighted towards services. We know that it's going more in that direction. Work, to a certain extent, is moving more towards outputs and outcomes. And if organizations don't get this under control, they're not going to compete at the speed that things are changing.
They won't. I mean, their competitors are doing it, so they need to figure out how they can do it too.
So it's a chance for everybody to really level up. And I think it's a chance for procurement to level up and become more strategic as well. It was interesting listening to you and some of the other delegates talking about token talent. And you were kind of saying, it's been a failing thing for a while. And I think you referred to it as, you were like, unified workforces. Is that because you want to get away from the kind of like total talent?
Because it's got such a bad stigma attached to it. So calling it unified workforce management, I feel like you talk about total talent, and it's been that buzzword for so long.
But it's sort of not moved in a lot of cases.
So it's like, well, how do we change the narrative? Well, one, you've got to change what you call it, because people immediately hear that, they're like, it's not possible. We're not going to do it. We don't have it. Well, you can call it something else. You don't even have to call it unified workforce management. Just call it workforce management or advisory or whatever you want. But it's absolutely possible, and it's something that companies could do and they could do well. I feel like with minimal effort. It's got to be intentional.
I agree, and it is a real thing now. I had a really interesting conversation with Lisa from Dow Chemicals, and she's really passionate around the whole kind of unified workforce, token talent management. But one of the things in the conversation with her that was she was really kind of passionate about is, for most, if you want to do total talent or unified workforce, you've got to have every workforce channel under some sort of control and visible before you start trying to then build on the complexity and aggregate that up and do all the cool strategic stuff to coordinate it all and orchestrate it. And for most organizations, that's services procurement. So who knows, if the services procurement world moves forward and the growth and opportunity expands and the sophistication, because it's at a low level of maturity compared to like contingent workforce, as that ramps up, which I believe is going to happen very rapidly over the next year or so, suddenly total workforce management actually does become reality, doesn't it?
It becomes that quickly, right? I mean, because you're really managing skills that you need to do the work, right? And to your point, if you're not tracking your services procurement, you're missing out on a large spend. I mean, if you're looking at large organizations, we talk about that, you're often 9 to 10 times the spend in services procurement of what you are in actual staff augmentation. Mid-sized companies probably 4 or 5 times. So, and with that spend comes people, that are all doing that work, right? So if you don't have visibility in what those people are doing, the skills that they bring to the table, how are you ever going to do total talent management?
The time is now for change. I think, again, thank you so much. I would just encourage, anybody who's interested in this, anybody who's got questions, just get involved in the conversation. And the more conversation that we see happening in the market in all areas, I applaud that and I welcome that. And I think that's what's going to really make the difference. The people who are trying to do this and the people who've got questions about it and people like yourselves who've got expertise, get together, have the conversations, and some huge opportunities and exciting times ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.